Somewhere inside a vault, right now, sits every dollar you've ever saved, protected by a mathematical lock that has never been broken. Somewhere else, a machine is being built that could break that lock in minutes. And in the middle of all of it sits a decision being made in Washington, right now, about who gets to control the technology that decides whether your money stays safe or becomes exposed overnight. This isn't a movie plot. This is happening in 2026, and most people have no idea it's unfolding. On June 22nd, 2026, President Trump sat in the Oval Office, flanked by the CEOs of Google and IBM, and signed 2 executive orders that quietly reshaped the future of American finance, national security, and technology. Most news coverage treated it as just another tech policy story. It wasn't. These 2 documents may end up deciding who controls the next great financial revolution, and almost nobody outside a small circle of physicists, bankers, and intelligence officials fully understands what's at stake. To understand why this moment matters so much, you have to understand what quantum computers actually threaten. Every bank account, every stock trade, every Bitcoin wallet, every encrypted message sent across the internet relies on a form of mathematical protection called public key cryptography. It works because certain math problems are so difficult that even the world's fastest supercomputers would take longer than the age of the universe to solve them. That difficulty is the entire foundation of digital trust. It's why you can send your bank details online without someone stealing them the instant you hit send. Quantum computers threaten to shatter that foundation. Unlike normal computers, which process information one step at a time, quantum computers exploit strange properties of physics to explore many possible solutions simultaneously. A mathematician named Peter Shor discovered decades ago that a sufficiently powerful quantum computer could solve the exact math problems protecting modern encryption. Not in billions of years, but in minutes. For a long time, that was considered a distant, almost theoretical concern. That is no longer true. In 2019, experts estimated you would need roughly 20 million physical qubits, the basic building blocks of a quantum computer, to break the encryption protecting something like Bitcoin. By 2025, that number had dropped below 1 million. By early 2026, some researchers were suggesting it could be as low as 100,000 qubits under the right conditions. The gap between science fiction and reality has been shrinking every single year, and it's shrinking faster than almost anyone predicted. To put that shrinking timeline into perspective, think about how quickly other technologies have gone from laboratories. Curiosity to everyday reality. Computers themselves once filled entire rooms and were only accessible to governments and universities. Within a few decades, they shrank down to fit inside a pocket. Quantum computing appears to be following a similar curve, except this time, the stakes aren't just convenience. The stakes are the literal mathematical locks protecting trillions of dollars in global wealth. Every year, those qubit estimates drop is another year closer to a moment nobody can fully predict, and every major government on Earth knows it. This isn't the first time Washington has taken quantum computing seriously either. Back in 2018, during his first term, President Trump signed the National Quantum Initiative Act into law, doubling federal investment into quantum research and development almost overnight. That original law laid the groundwork for nearly a decade of steady federal funding, university research grants, and early-stage exploration into quantum technology. But 2026 marks a dramatic escalation of that original strategy, shifting from funding pure research toward direct commercialization, direct equity investment, and an explicit acknowledgement that other nations are racing to catch up, and in some cases, potentially overtake American leadership entirely. In March of 2026, Google's quantum AI team published a paper that sent shockwaves through the entire financial and cybersecurity world. Their research suggested that breaking the elliptic curve, cryptography, protecting Bitcoin, Ethereum, and nearly every major cryptocurrency could require 20 times fewer quantum resources than previously believed, specifically fewer than 500,000 physical qubits. Their modeling even outlined a realistic scenario where an attacker could hijack a live transaction during Bitcoin's roughly 10-minute confirmation window, with a documented success rate above 40% under certain conditions. Here's the part that should genuinely concern you. Researchers identified that roughly 32% of all Bitcoin in existence, worth hundreds of billions of dollars, sits in wallets with publicly exposed cryptographic keys, the exact kind of exposure a quantum attack could exploit first. This isn't some far-off hypothetical anymore. It's a mapped, quantified vulnerability sitting inside one of the largest asset classes on the planet, and the countdown clock is getting shorter every year. But cryptocurrency is really just the most visible piece of a much bigger picture. The same underlying cryptography protects your bank's internal systems, the Federal Reserve's payment infrastructure, stock exchanges, insurance databases, healthcare records, and classified government communications. If quantum computers eventually crack this kind of encryption, the damage wouldn't be limited. To crypto investors, it would touch nearly every digital financial system built over the last 50 years, all at once, everywhere in the world. This is where a chilling concept called harvest now, decrypt later comes into play. You don't actually need a working quantum computer today to steal tomorrow's secrets. Adversaries can quietly intercept and store massive amounts of encrypted data, right? Now patiently waiting years, even a decade, until quantum computers mature enough to unlock it. Doug Adams from Vanderbilt's Institute of National Security summed up the mindset perfectly, describing adversaries as capturing the data and simply waiting because they're very patient. That means sensitive financial and security data being encrypted today may already be sitting in a foreign server, silently waiting for its expiration date to arrive. This is exactly the danger President Trump's second executive order, called Securing the Nation Against Advanced Cryptographic Attacks, was designed to address. It orders federal agencies to build a coordinated national strategy for migrating to what's known as post-quantum cryptography, new encryption methods specifically designed to resist quantum attacks. The order sets hard deadlines. Federal agencies must transition their most critical systems to quantum-resistant encryption for key establishment by December 31st, 2030, and for digital signatures by December 31st, 2031. Those deadlines might sound comfortably far away, but cybersecurity experts have been warning that this framing badly misses the point. A 2030 deadline does absolutely nothing to protect data that's being intercepted and harvested right now in 2026. If your sensitive information is stolen today and simply held in storage, waiting for quantum decryption tools to mature, then the actual security window isn't 2030. It's already closing right now, while most of the public isn't even aware there's a clock running at all. The companion order, called Ushering in the Next Frontier of Quantum Innovation, takes a completely different approach. Instead of playing defense, it's about aggressively pursuing offense, making sure the United States wins the global race to build the most powerful quantum computers first. The order explicitly frames quantum information science as a matter of national economic power, high-paying jobs, and security dominance, language pulled almost directly from the executive order's own text, which describes America as standing at the cusp of a quantum revolution. This order directs the White House's top science advisor to publish an updated national quantum strategy within 180 days, with a heavy emphasis on commercialization, real-world deployment, and partnerships with private industry, not just academic research sitting in a lab somewhere. It also establishes something called the Quantum Computer for Application Development and Discovery Science Effort, an ambitious national project aimed at delivering at least one extremely powerful quantum computer to a Department of Energy facility, specifically built to kickstart an entirely new era of quantum-enabled scientific discovery. Beyond research goals, the order calls for deploying quantum-enabled sensors and communication networks within 5 years, reconstituting a National Quantum Initiative Advisory Committee to guide long-term policy, and expanding something called the Quantum Counterintelligence Protection Team. That last detail matters enormously. It signals that the federal government isn't just treating quantum computing as an exciting new industry, it's treating it as a matter of espionage risk, supply chain security, and outright national defense on the same level as nuclear technology or advanced military hardware. Now here's where the story shifts from policy into something that looks a lot more like a financial power play. Just 1 month before these executive orders were signed, the Department of Commerce announced letters of intent to take direct equity stakes in 9 leading American quantum computing companies, representing an investment of roughly $2 billion in taxpayer money. This wasn't just funding research grants. This was the federal government becoming an actual shareholder, a literal financial stakeholder, in the very companies racing to build this technology. If this kind of behind-the-scenes power move surprises you, imagine how much more is happening. That never makes the headlines, and that's exactly why it's worth hitting subscribe right now, because we're going to keep digging into these stories the mainstream news barely covers. That government ownership stake raises an obvious and uncomfortable question. Who exactly decides which companies get chosen as the winners of America's quantum future, and who personally benefits when that decision gets made? The answer gets genuinely uncomfortable once you start looking at the people actually running this program. Oversight of the initiative is led by Deputy Commerce Secretary Paul Dabber, a former quantum computing executive who personally co-founded a company called Bohr Quantum Technology. To his credit, that specific company was excluded from participating in the program, presumably to avoid a direct conflict. But the web of connections doesn't stop there. Deputy Secretary of Defense Steve Feinberg spent more than 30 years as co-SI, founder and leader of Cerberus Capital Management, one of the most influential private equity firms in the country, before stepping down in early 2025 to join the administration. Cerberus, the firm he built and ran for 3 decades, currently holds a position worth roughly $100 million in IonQ, one of the most prominent publicly traded quantum computing, Companies, and one of the exact companies positioned to benefit from this new wave of federal quantum investment and policy support. To be clear, having deep industry experience isn't automatically corrupt. You genuinely want people who understand quantum computing making decisions about quantum computing policy, but critics have raised a fair and serious concern here. When the people writing the rules, choosing which companies receive government backing, and shaping national strategy have deep, direct personal and financial ties to specific players in that exact industry, the line between public policy and private profit gets dangerously blurry. It becomes incredibly difficult to separate what's good for the country from what's good for a very small, very connected circle of insiders. This tension became almost impossible to ignore visually on the day the executive orders were actually signed. Picture it. The President of the United States, sitting behind the Resolute desk, one of the most symbolically loaded pieces of furniture in the world, flanked not by generals or economists, but by the sitting CEOs of Google and IBM. For financial analysts watching that moment, the image itself told a story before a single word of policy text was even read. Quantum computing had officially crossed the threshold from experimental science into a full-blown national economic priority, backed at the very highest level of government. Wall Street noticed immediately. Investment firms like WisdomTree pointed directly to these executive orders, alongside recent CHIPS Act funding, as major catalysts elevating quantum computing to genuine national priority status, strengthening the case for dedicated quantum investment funds. Analysts specifically highlighted forthcoming Department of Energy technical specifications as a signal that could help investors identify the next generation of quantum industry leaders, essentially treating government policy documents as a roadmap for where private capital should flow next. This kind of institutional reaction matters more than most casual observers realize. When major financial firms start building investment products specifically around a government policy signal, it tells you they believe the policy is durable, not just a temporary talking point that might disappear with the next election cycle. Billions of dollars in institutional capital don't chase headlines. They chase structural long-term shifts in how an entire industry is expected to be funded, regulated, and prioritized for years to come. And right now, that capital is clearly flowing toward quantum computing at a pace that would have seemed unrealistic just a few years ago. This political momentum arrived at almost the exact same time as a genuine scientific milestone. In June of 2026, a company called Quantinuum published research in the journal Nature describing their new system called Helios, a 98-qubit trapped ion quantum processor built with a sophisticated rotating ion storage architecture, achieving 2-qubit gate accuracy averaging above 99.9%. Produced in collaboration with Sandia National Laboratories, the paper demonstrated that Helios operates well beyond what today's most powerful classical supercomputers could ever hope to simulate, even using theoretical exascale computing power sustained for astronomical stretches of time. That combination, real scientific progress, landing at the exact same moment as massive political backing and direct government investment, is precisely why so many industry analysts are calling this the most consequential quantum policy action in American history, surpassing even the original National Quantum Initiative Act, signed back in 2018. One research firm described it plainly, stating that this moment would materially reshape investment patterns, procurement priorities, and competitive dynamics across the entire quantum computing market for years to come. That same analysis pointed out that the order's directive to deploy real quantum sensors and networks within 5 years signals something important, that the federal government is no longer treating quantum computing as a distant future paradigm, but as an active, present-day infrastructure priority requiring immediate operational planning right now. So let's connect all these pieces together, because individually they're interesting, but together they paint a much bigger picture. You have a technology capable of eventually breaking the encryption, protecting global banking, cryptocurrency, and national security communications. You have a compressed and rapidly shrinking timeline for when you have a presidential administration directly investing taxpayer money as equity stakes inside the very companies racing to build it. And you have senior officials with deep, direct personal financial ties to that exact same industry now sitting inside the rooms where these decisions get made. Whoever controls the most advanced quantum computers doesn't just control a faster calculator. They control the ability to potentially break financial security systems that the entire world currently depends on, or alternatively, to build the next generation of unbreakable financial infrastructure before anyone else gets there first. That is an enormous amount of power to concentrate inside a handful of companies, especially when some of the people overseeing that power have personal financial relationships with the exact companies benefiting most. The reaction from within the quantum industry itself has been largely, though not entirely, positive. industry representatives have publicly praised the administration's willingness to financially back domestic quantum companies, noting that this kind of direct government commitment, combined with existing private capital already flowing into the sector, creates an unusually favorable environment for innovation and risk-taking. One industry expert specifically highlighted how impressive it was to see the government putting real financial skin in the game rather than simply issuing policy statements without backing them up with actual investment dollars. At the same time, more cautious voices within the industry have pointed out the obvious tension in this approach. When a government becomes a financial stakeholder in private companies, it inevitably creates pressure, whether stated explicitly or not, to see those companies succeed, potentially at the expense of objective, arm's-length regulatory oversight. If a company the government has invested millions of dollars into runs into technical trouble, cuts corners on security, or faces a serious data breach, will federal regulators respond with the same scrutiny they'd apply to a company they have no financial stake in whatsoever? That's a genuinely difficult question, and it's one that likely won't have a clear answer until it's actually tested by a real-world crisis. It's also worth understanding this isn't happening in a vacuum. This entire push is explicitly framed, both in the executive orders themselves and in surrounding administration commentary, as a response to intensifying global technology competition, particularly with China, which has been investing enormous sums into its own quantum research programs for years. The administration has already imposed export controls on quantum and related advanced technologies, working alongside international partners specifically to slow rival nations from catching up. This isn't just an economic story, it's genuinely being treated as the technological equivalent of a modern arms race. The global competition angle deserves a much closer look too, because this entire story only makes sense once you understand it's not really just about America versus the laws of physics. It's about America versus other nations racing toward the exact same finish line. China has poured enormous state resources into quantum research for years, treating it as a strategic priority on par with semiconductors and artificial intelligence. European nations, along with countries like Japan and South Korea, have launched their own national quantum strategies, each one trying to avoid being left behind in a technology race that could reshape military power, financial dominance, and intelligence capability all at once. This is precisely why the language inside Trump's executive orders reads less like a typical technology policy document and more like a national security doctrine. Phrases about accelerating deployment, strengthening domestic supply chains, and protecting against foreign espionage aren't just bureaucratic formality. They reflect a genuine high-level concern that whichever nation builds a truly powerful, fault-tolerant quantum computer, first, won't just win bragging rights in a scientific journal. They could gain the ability to potentially read encrypted communications belonging to rival governments, corporations, and financial institutions, essentially overnight, before anyone else even realizes the balance of power has shifted. That's also why the export control angle matters so much. By restricting the flow of advanced quantum components, specialized fabrication equipment, and certain research collaborations to rival nations, the administration is attempting to slow down competitors while simultaneously accelerating domestic progress through direct investment and streamlined regulation. It's a strategy that mirrors, in many ways, the earlier playbook used around advanced semiconductor technology, where export restrictions became a central tool in maintaining a competitive technological edge over rival powers. Inside the American quantum industry itself, a handful of companies have emerged as the clear frontrunners in this race, and it's worth understanding who they actually are. IBM has spent well over a decade building out its quantum computing division, steadily increasing qubit counts and refining error correction techniques across successive generations of hardware. IonQ, built around trapped ion technology, has become one of the most closely watched publicly traded companies in the sector, partly because of its direct financial ties to politically connected investors like Cerberus Capital Management. Quantinuum, formed through the merger of Honeywell's quantum division and Cambridge Quantum, produced the record-breaking Helios system that demonstrated capabilities well beyond what classical supercomputers can simulate. Each of these companies represents a different technical approach to the same fundamental challenge: building stable, scalable, error-corrected quantum systems capable of eventually running the kind of large-scale calculations that could threaten modern encryption, or alternatively, solve problems in medicine, materials science, and logistics that classical computers simply cannot handle. The federal government's decision to take direct equity stakes across 9 of these companies means taxpayers are now financially entangled with the outcome of this technological race in a way that's genuinely unprecedented in recent American history. Meanwhile, the cryptocurrency world has been scrambling to prepare for a threat that increasingly looks less theoretical every single month. Different blockchain networks are taking very different approaches. Bitcoin's community has been engaged in prolonged sometimes heated debate over how aggressively to respond, given how difficult it is to update a fully decentralized network that nobody's single entity controls. In February of 2026, developers merged a proposal called BIP 360, introducing a new type of quantum-resistant Bitcoin address, representing the very first concrete step toward hardening the network against future quantum attacks, though full implementation remains an ongoing, complicated process. Ethereum, by contrast, has been moving more proactively, with major exchanges like Coinbase establishing independent advisory boards made up of cryptographers and quantum computing experts, specifically tasked with assessing risk and guiding a phased migration strategy. Ethereum's much faster transaction confirmation window, roughly 12 to 15 seconds compared to Bitcoin's 10 minutes, gives it a smaller theoretical attack window, though experts note it carries its own distinct vulnerabilities related to how it exposes public keys by default. Even Google itself, the same company whose researchers are producing the very estimates driving this entire conversation, has set an internal deadline of 2029 to migrate its own authentication infrastructure to post-quantum cryptography. When the company generating the threat assessments is also racing to protect its own systems years ahead of the government's official 2030 deadline, that tells you something important about how seriously the people closest to this technology are actually taking the risk, regardless of how the general public perceives it. It's important to stay balanced here and not slide into pure panic, because plenty of credible experts still urge real caution about the timeline. Adam Back, a prominent cryptography expert and CEO of Blockstream, has publicly argued that a genuinely practical quantum threat to Bitcoin remains somewhere between 20 and 40 years away, a dramatically longer timeline than some of the more alarming headlines suggest. Independent analysis has similarly emphasized that no cryptographically relevant quantum computer exists anywhere today, and that the hardware gap separating current machines from a genuine threat still spans hundreds of times the qubits available on even the best systems built so far. That gap matters, and it's worth repeating clearly. Today's most advanced quantum machines operate with roughly 1,000 to 1,200 physical qubits, and at most, somewhere around 100 logical qubits. Breaking the encryption protecting Bitcoin and Ethereum is estimated to require somewhere between 500,000 and over 300 million physical qubits, depending on which research estimate you trust. That's still an enormous, genuinely difficult engineering mountain left to climb, even with the accelerating pace of recent breakthroughs. It also helps to understand the difference between a physical qubit and a logical qubit, because this distinction gets lost in most headlines. A physical qubit is a single raw quantum bit, incredibly fragile and prone to errors from heat, vibration, and electromagnetic noise. A logical qubit is built by combining many physical qubits together using error correction techniques, creating a single, more stable unit of quantum information that can actually be trusted to compute something meaningful. Building enough reliable logical qubits to run a serious cryptography-breaking algorithm is still considered one of the hardest unsolved engineering problems in modern physics, which is exactly why credible timelines still stretch out toward the end of this decade, or well into the next one. On the regulatory side, the National Institute of Standards and Technology has already been laying the groundwork for years. Back in August of 2024, after a 6-year evaluation process involving 82 candidate algorithms submitted by research teams from around the world, NIST finalized the first 3 official post-quantum cryptography standards. These new standards are specifically designed to replace the vulnerable encryption methods used today, giving banks, governments, and technology companies an actual concrete framework to start migrating toward. In March of 2025, NIST added a 5th algorithm to that growing standard, showing just how quickly this entire field continues to evolve, even at the level of basic mathematical standards. Some analysts have gone so far as to label 2026 the year of quantum security, a coordinated global initiative backed by agencies including the FBI, NIST, and the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency, all working together to accelerate public awareness and encourage faster migration toward quantum-resistant systems. That kind of multi-agency, cross-industry coordination rarely happens, unless the people closest to a threat genuinely believe the clock is ticking faster than the public realizes. So where does that leave us? The honest answer is somewhere in between blind panic and complete dismissal. The threat is real enough that the President of the United States, the Department of Commerce, the Department of Defense, Google, IBM, Coinbase, and the National Institute of Standards and Technology are all treating it with genuine coordinated urgency, dedicating billions of dollars and years of institutional planning toward addressing it. At the same time, the actual hardware capable of breaking modern encryption doesn't exist yet, and estimates for when it might arrive still vary by decades, depending on which expert you ask. What makes this moment genuinely historic isn't just the science. It's the fact that a sitting American president has now explicitly tied quantum computing directly to the future of national financial security, economic competitiveness, and global power, backed by real executive authority, real taxpayer investment, and real deadlines written into federal law. Whether that leadership ends up protecting ordinary Americans from a genuine future threat, or primarily enriches a small circle of politically connected insiders first, is a question that honestly won't be fully answered for years. There's also a banking-specific angle to this story that deserves its own spotlight, because traditional finance has been quietly preparing for this moment longer than most people realize. Major financial institutions, including some of the largest banks in the world, have been running internal quantum risk assessments for years, cataloging exactly which systems, which databases, and which communication channels rely on the encryption standards now considered vulnerable. One widely circulated industry research report even described this moment as a trillion-dollar security race, emphasizing that the cost of migrating global financial infrastructure to quantum-resistant systems will itself become one of the largest technology spending waves in modern banking history. That spending wave creates its own economic ripple effects, separate from the quantum computers themselves. Cybersecurity firms specializing in encryption migration, cryptographic inventory management, and quantum-safe infrastructure are positioned to benefit enormously as banks, insurers, and government agencies scramble to meet the new federal deadlines. Investment analysts have specifically pointed to this dynamic as a multi-year opportunity, meaning the quantum revolution isn't just about who builds the fastest quantum computer. It's also about who builds the strongest defenses against it, and both sides of that equation represent massive overlapping financial opportunity. So what does all of this actually mean for an ordinary person watching this unfold from the outside? It doesn't mean panic. It doesn't mean pulling your money out of the bank or dumping your crypto overnight. The realistic threat, according to most credible experts, is still likely years away, possibly a decade or more. But it does mean paying attention to a story that's unfolding largely outside the public spotlight, involving trillions of dollars, the highest levels of government, and a small circle of deeply connected insiders who stand to gain enormously depending on how this all plays out. Understanding the stakes now, long before most people are even aware there's a race happening at all, is exactly the kind of advantage that separates people who see change coming from people who get blindsided by it. What we do know is this: the financial system you use every single day, your bank account, your retirement savings, your crypto wallet, if you have one, all of it currently rests on a form of mathematical protection that quantum computers are being built right now with direct government backing, specifically to eventually challenge whoever ends up controlling that technology first won't just win a business competition. They'll hold enormous influence over the next era of global financial trust itself, and right now, the fight over exactly who that will be is happening in Washington, largely outside the public spotlight. There's one more layer to this story worth sitting with before we wrap up. It's less about hardware and policy and more about trust itself. The entire modern financial system, from your local bank to the global stock market to every cryptocurrency exchange, runs on a shared, largely invisible assumption that certain mathematical problems are simply too hard for anyone to solve. That single assumption is the quiet foundation underneath trillions of dollars in daily transactions. Quantum computing represents the first real credible technological challenge to that foundation in the entire history of digital finance. When a foundation like that starts to show cracks, even distant theoretical ones, the institutions built on top of it have to respond, whether they want to or not. That's really what we're witnessing right now, not some far-off science fiction scenario, but the earliest, most consequential stages of a global financial system quietly rebuilding its own foundation in real time, years before most of the people relying on that foundation even realize construction has begun. It's also worth remembering that moments like this tend to reward the people who pay attention early, long before most people understood what the internet would eventually become. A small number of early investors, engineers, and policymakers positioned themselves at the center of that transformation. The same pattern played out with mobile technology, with cloud computing, and now, very likely, with quantum computing and the post-quantum financial systems being built to withstand it. Whether that reshapes personal fortunes, national economies, or simply the way ordinary people think about digital trust, the foundation being poured right now in Washington will likely still be standing decades from now. None of this means the sky is falling. It means the ground is shifting, slowly, deliberately, and largely out of public view, guided by a mix of legitimate national security concern, genuine scientific ambition, and no small amount of private financial interest tangled up together at the very top of government. Sorting out exactly where one motivation ends and another begins may take years, possibly longer than the technology itself takes to mature. But the fact that this fight is happening now, openly, with real executives, Orders, real billions of dollars, and real deadlines written into federal policy means the outcome is no longer a distant hypothetical. It's already being decided. If you found this breakdown genuinely eye-opening, do me a favor and hit that like button, because stories like this deserve more attention than they're currently getting. And if you want to keep understanding exactly how power, technology, and money are quietly reshaping your financial future before most people even notice, make sure you're subscribed, because this story is only just getting started, and I'll see you in the next one.